What's up, guys? Okay, I had to sign the intro because I wasn't trying to get jacked up today. I know it's broad daylight over here, but the death angels are out there. Daylight doesn't stop them, so I had to be careful. Now that I think I'm relatively safe, I can talk. So I saw this movie over the weekend and I have some thoughts. Initially, I was not thrilled about this announcement of a new Quiet Place movie that was a prequel. You all know how I feel about prequels. I'm of the opinion that such a story has to justify its existence and bring something new to the overall story. Depending on where you sit on this movie, you may or may not think that this offering brought something new to the table. And I would beg to differ. That's my opinion. But speaking of my opinion, let's get into that. So, what is this movie? What the heck? It's essentially, if you've seen the first Quiet Place movie and you've seen A Quiet Place Part 2, it is that set in New York City. That's it. So that's it. That's the review. Hope you no, no, but essentially that's the framework. You've taken the basic setup of A Quiet Place, the basic premise, which is in order to stay alive, you have to be silent so that the threat does not spot you and kill you. And you've taken that out of the small rural area and brought that into a city. And not just any city. This is New York. New York City. One of the loudest places at peak hours, during peak hours on the planet. I had to specify that because if you've been in New York City, you know how busy it is and how busy it can be. I don't know that it's always as loud as the movie needs it to be 24/7. I think there are peak hours in Manhattan where it's super busy and it's bustling and hustling, and that's when you might have a lot of sound going on. In later hours when things are more relaxed, if there's such a thing as that in New York, the sound probably never goes all the way away. It's just sort of, you get lower levels of it at night, or particularly late at night if you're up at that time. Nonetheless, New York City is the setting for this movie, and we've got new people that we're following, and then we just see what happens. How do they handle the first day of the alien invasion? The interesting thing about this movie is I hadn't thought about this until well after I'd seen it. And at first I wasn't bothered, but I guess I was a little bit, I questioned why New York City. I didn't catch this again on my first viewing. I didn't catch it because New York City often feels like disaster central. You look at a lot of sort of disaster movies, and even if it's not directly set in New York, there's going to be a shot of something happening in New York. As being one of the major American cities, New York gets a lot of attention in that area, in the disaster zone. So my first instinct was another disaster situation in New York, but I was reminded that Djimon Hounsou's character from Part 2 had told a story from his time escaping from New York, and then it made sense. It was a nice connection. While I'm there, I wasn't fully sold on Djimon's inclusion at first until I remembered, oh yeah, he did talk about escaping from New York, and I think that was genius. The fact that we get to see a version, we get to see the story he's talking about in his escape from New York. The disappointment in that, though, is if you're going to have Djimon Hounsou in your movie, particularly this one, as a and his character as the connective tissue between part two and this movie, why would you not have him be more of a fixture? That's was one of my bigger questions. I feel like he should have been the other person in the movie that you followed. I liked Joseph Quinn's character. I know everyone's talking about him from his appearance from Stranger Things, which I hadn't seen. I think I watched up to season 3. I hadn't seen season 4 yet, so I haven't caught all the way up. So I wasn't aware of the juice that he apparently seems to have. I understand he's going to be Human Torch, which I'd known about, but I'd forgotten about that, and so that's going to be interesting. And if this movie is any indication, then I'm sure he'll be a good Johnny Storm. But as much as I appreciated his character, I feel like it would have made more sense, just in thinking about part 2 to this movie, it would have made more sense for Henry to be the other character that's on this journey with Samira, because when I think more about his conversation to Cillian Murphy's character in part 1, that there was he spoke about his escape, and I think if you're doing a prequel, the movie should depict that. It should depict him escaping. As it stands, we don't really get that. We know he was there. We see him a couple times, and then he is escaped. Somehow he's made it out. And we know he did because we see him in part 2. So we know that that's not like a spoiler or anything. There's nothing problematic with that. But I just feel like in terms of logic and different ways to make the story more, make the connective tissue richer than just having the character who appeared in the previous situation in this movie. When you think about the idea of prequels usually depict something that was mentioned or described in a previous movie. That's how I've always seen prequels. They usually built off of a line or something that seems like a casual throwaway something that gives context to the story in front of us. Now, a prequel will take that and build on that and expand on it. And you will see that prequel movie that will show what was sort of only hinted at or talked about. A case in point, you look at the original Star Wars, how Luke and Obi-Wan have a conversation about the Clone Wars. Luke asks Ben if he had fought in the Clone Wars. So at that time, no one knew what that was. The Clone Wars was just the previous war that had taken place before the current one that's taking place right now against the Empire, whatever it is. So you look at the prequel movies, and particularly the Attack of the Clones, and the Clone Wars is all up in that. That movie is the Clone Wars, at least the beginning of them. So A Quiet Place Day One doesn't really do that, which is, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I talk about it, is a little bit confusing. Like, well, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you do what most prequels do? As it stands, you just Henry as a character is the connective tissue, but his actual story of how he escapes New York is not a part of the movie, really. And that's but now that I think about it too, as I'm speaking about it, maybe it doesn't need to be. The idea is, he got off the boat, or he got off. He escaped New York to get to the boat, because we see him in part 2. And in a way, that's better. I think there's something cool about that you don't see his story, but something about it just feels like, he should have been the person on the journey with Lupita Nyong'o's character. But I like that it does some things a little bit differently than what a typical prequel might. I'll get into the good things about it. This was not an issue for me. I understand it was for most people. I like that the Death Angels don't really have a name in universe. Like, no one calls them by a name. They don't say aliens. They don't say monsters. They're just a threat that you have to escape. And that's endlessly cool to me. There's no, they're clickers. They're whatever, reavers, or whatever name you want to give them. That the humans don't really have a name for them. And in that way, there's still a bit of mystery left. But I liked that the fact that no humans actually call them that, sort of in relation, how we see them interact with each other, the humans, that helps maintain some of the allure and the mystique of these creatures. And then along those lines, there's not a ton of backstory still about them, which I think is cool. I understand that's probably a problem for some people. I actually like that there's no backstory. Why do you need backstory? If there's a natural disaster coming, you don't care how a tornado or hurricane started. You just have to escape, get out of the way so you can stay alive. You don't care why the terrorists come. You don't really care about that. If they're there, you got to just make sure you can survive. You don't care why Michael Myers is slashing everybody up. If you're in this path, you just get out of the way. That's like so my feeling is that it's kind of cool that there isn't a backstory about the culture and then the sort of the inner workings of the aliens. Now, I think we know enough about them at this point. We know a couple weaknesses of them, and I think that's it. The tricky thing about it with this film, because it's the first day, the first time these humans are encountering them, you don't know anything about them, and I think that's cool. Like, as an audience member, that might be a problem for some people who want to know more about them. But why would you get more information about them in the first encounter with them? That feels like you'd have the least amount of information about them. I tend to think that we have enough at this stage. Now, if they do a fourth movie, which I feel like I've been reading or hearing that they might, and you might follow up with the Abbott family again, then that's something else, because at that point you know already how to take some of them out. So the trick is there's so many of them. You got to figure out a way to do that a lot of times so you can live comfortably again. So anyway, lack of details about them was cool to me. I always like more mystery than less. The acting is, I'm just going to come out and say it. This is not a secret. Everybody knows this. If you cast Lupita Nyong'o in your movie, there's a certain expectation that comes with that. And whatever expectations you have of her going in, I think it's safe to say that she exceeds them. She meets them, but then in some places she might exceed them, which is surprising for someone of her caliber who's been at the top for more than a decade or whatever now. It's pretty clear, you know what you're getting. Even if you don't know the specifics of what you're getting, you know you're going to get something really good if she's on board. Lupita Nyong'o seems like she's a type of performer who can act circles around a lot of people. And I think because this movie seemed like it was a vehicle in a lot of ways for her, much in the same way, much like Us, I think in a way, Us is similar. The way she did, and I think Us is still one of her more dynamic performances. And I think if I were to think of another one, this is a close second. This is like right in there. She was really good in this movie. And Joseph Quinn, I liked him. I thought he was very good. Seeing him here makes me want to now go back and watch Stranger Things to see, because I remember when that season dropped and how his character was people's favorite. He sort of replaced Steve from previous seasons. Steve and Dustin were the ones before this guy, comes and takes over the mantle. So now that I've seen him here, I thought he was solid enough. I thought he had good chemistry with Nyong'o, and he held his own. I think the pacing of this movie is also really good. It's tight, much like I think the first two movies feel tight, even if they have long sections or whatever it is. The movie feels tight, and I appreciate that. And it still feels like enough was expressed that you don't feel like it was too drawn out. I didn't anyway. I didn't feel like it was too drawn out. Thought it was well done. The direction, I think, was sound also. Stepping in for John Krasinski in the writing, directing area, Michael Sarnowski co-wrote this picture with John Krasinski, I believe. And it was nice to know that John Krasinski was still sort of around in the process as one of the producers, whatever. So his hand is still in it. You can still feel the container that he's holding, that Michael is playing in, and I think Michael Sarnowski does a great job in stepping into the world of A Quiet Place, and not deviating too much, adding his own spin on it, not really doing too much that's changing the rules, the confines of what we know this world to be. I thought his hand was steady, and he allows the actors to do what they're doing. He can feel like he's there to kind of hold things together, and you don't feel like he's getting in the way of what's happening, and that's endlessly cool. The writing, I think, is also pretty good. I like that there's this is undeniably a quiet place experience, which means that there's a lot of spaces of silence, and with that, you have a lot of room to witness the various ways that information is communicated without words, without dialogue. It's actually really cool, because there's a lot of you get to tap into the emotional resonance of what we're seeing. Yes, this is a sort of horror thriller, and it's more, and then there's jump scares and everything else that like the first two movies have this, like any thriller has this type of stuff. But it's more than just like a thrill ride. The emotional depth that can come from dialogue being expressed, but in this case comes from a lot of silence and a lot of things, body language being expressed. And a lot of this is Lupita Nyong'o, the way she displays this with eyes, facial expressions. And Joseph Quinn is good at this too. The way that's expressed is fantastic. And it would be like a good exercise to see how well you could tell a story without dialogue, because a lot of stuff is conveyed without that. And there's a cat named Frodo in this movie, who is like the key to a lot of this, a lot of people's favorite character in the movie. My one complaint with this movie is that the cat itself made no noise. It might have been responsible for some noises, but the cat itself never meowed, never hissed. And that was interesting to me. That's the only thing I would have liked to have seen more, portrayed more realistically. But the good thing about that, though, is that the cat, because it doesn't make any sounds, there's something about it that feels almost spiritual. Like this cat is like a guardian angel throughout the proceedings. And that's a different texture than anything we've had in the first two movies. So in that way, I would say this movie brings something new, a new flavor to it. It's almost like the cat, there's like a hypnotic quality to the cat, where you follow the cat in a couple different instances. So you get to sort of live in the cat's shoes for a minute as things are happening, and that's interesting. We haven't really had that before. You sense that the cat also is communicating things without saying anything, without any words or without any meows or anything like that. So that's always that's a new wrinkle. And of course, the action is solid. It puts the creatures and the humans in new positions, unique ways of figuring out ways to escape them and escape the threat. And that's cool. It's still thrilling. You still get nervous around, I did. But overall, I thought this was a good movie. If the first two movies are like the sort of top tier, this movie isn't as strong, I don't think. Well, it's strong in a different way, but if we're looking at it on paper, it does feel like it's a notch or two below the first two movies. And I'm not quite sure why that is just yet. I think probably some of it has to do with, I don't know. I don't know why I think that. I think Oh, you know what I think it is? I think it has to do with character decisions and the way things work out, which is all good. It's all well and good. It's just that I think the way the film goes from point to point doesn't feel like it has as much punch in the same way as the first two movies. Even though in both cases, in all the cases, characters trying to get from one place to another place and trying to avoid danger at the same time. The other thing I thought was great about this movie is the character of Sam and how she goes about trying to get through this ordeal. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of the first two movies. And in that way, it feels like it's a perfect connective offering for the first two movies, because you, in both instances, you have characters, both female, who are presented with something that is, we meet them in the world grappling with something that feels like to the rest of us like it could be a disadvantage or a disability or a negative or a weakness, when in fact being placed in a situation where you have to survive against an unknown threat, that very thing that most people would see during normal times as a weakness, as a disability, as a detriment, that very thing ends up being the thing that helps you win the day, as it were. And I think all three movies have this, through the main characters. Each of them is dealing with something. Well, particularly the lead characters, the people who we're following. I think that's endlessly cool. And in an odd way, even though the endings of the three movies may feel, at least particularly within the first two, they might feel too similar, but still have some punch. The ending of Day One is very different, but still has almost the same type of electric punch. It's so weird. And I respect that the risk it took. You know me, I'm always talking about risk in these stories and how a story is taking that risk. And it does bold things, and that's always respectable. Like I respect that to the end of time. And this movie is no exception. It does take risks. It doesn't hold your hand through the experience. Like it expects you to understand the rules of the world, having seen the first two movies, and it doesn't explain those things to you. What it does explain, though, is that there is it gives us a little bit of insight into a new weakness to the alien. It's not a new we know what it is. It's not a new weakness, but it's new to these people here in New York as they're trying to deal with this situation. So it's great. It's a very good movie. Again, I don't think it's as good as the first two movies, but it has its own charm, and it definitely hits an emotional core in a different way than the first two movies. The other thing that's cool about the women we follow is that you spend the first 2/3 of the movie with them, and they are fighting and struggling and trying to survive. By the time we get to the third act, and they've realized some new path forward, each of them takes matters into their own hands, and they decide how they want to make the next move. They do it on their terms, and they're not running anymore. They decide they're fighting and running and trying to escape until they choose not to anymore. And I think that now I'm talking about the way, you know what? No, this movie is just as good as the first two movies. It's just on a different, when you watch it, you know what I mean. It's just on a different, it's in a different slot in a way. Spiritually, it's right in line with the first two movies. So think on that. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for this review. But I'd be curious to know what you thought. If you'd seen the movie already, if you plan to see it, let me know. I'm curious to hear what's going on there. If you've made it through the end of this video, thank you for taking the time to watch it. And stay tuned. More reviews coming up pretty soon. In the meantime, I got to go get dinner. So, and hopefully I'll do it quietly enough to where I don't get jacked up by the death angels out there. But take it easy, and I will see you next time.